Crew. Okay, so we're going to finish up with our chapter on Ribsy today. Not the book, just a chapter. We were on chapter 4, right? Chapter 4, and Ribsy, we found he became a mascot at school. Remember, kind of wandered around. He was fed by a few workers who were just out doing different things, but Ribsy now has found that being at this school is a great place for him to be because at the school, he's able to sleep in the classroom, go out with the kids to recess, they feed him, and even the teacher and principal say, it's okay for him to be there. So let's pick up where we left off. The principal has just told them, looks like he can stay because he's a well-behaved dog. So let's see what happens. The week went smoothly until Friday arrived. Friday, in Mrs. Sonchek's room, was show and tell day. It started like any other day. Mrs. Sonchek looked around the class and noted that Danny Yaxley was absent. Ribsy stood up with the rest of the class for the flag salute and then flopped down for a nap. Does anyone have anything to share with the class this morning? Asked Mrs. Sonchek. Kathleen Adelson came to the front of the room to show off her doll, which had a pair of real little sunglasses. The boys looked scornful. Pete Schlichtman showed a tool chest he got for his birthday. He said his mother would not let him use the hammer or saw in the house. The boys looked interested. They wished they had tool chests too. Philip Gorberg had just finished telling about the time he was riding down a hill with his father and the brakes of the car refused to work when the door of the classroom opened. Danny Yaxley came in with his mother, who was carrying a sheet of corrugated cardboard on a wooden box with holes bored in the sides. It was a rule in Mrs. Sonchek's room that anyone who brought a pet for show and tell had to bring his mother too. The mother's job was to take the pet home. Kind of sounds like our classroom. Mom or dad have to bring it. Mom and dad have to take it home. I'm sorry we're late, Mrs. Sonchek, said Mrs. Yaxley, who looked as if she had not taken time to put on her lipstick. Danny insisted on bringing a squirrel for show and tell. The cage was too big to carry, and I had to stop and bore holes in this box, and, well, I am not very good at boring holes. All the boys thought this was funny. They were sure they would be good at boring holes. The class was excited. They were going to get to see a real live squirrel right there in school. My squirrel is gnawing on the box. Danny's eyes were bright with excitement. A live squirrel? Exclaimed Mrs. Sonchek, smiling bravely. But how can we see it in a wooden box? Danny said the aquarium was empty and we could put Frisky in it with his cardboard over the top. Mrs. Yaxley looked apologetic. The whole thing was not her idea. Yes, said Danny with enthusiasm. Frisky will look real nice in the aquarium. The class was delighted. A squirrel in an aquarium. All right, Danny. Mrs. Sonchek gave her permission. I'm sorry to take up so much classroom time, apologized Danny's mother as she put the wooden box down inside the aquarium. Now, Danny, hold the cardboard over the top and clap it down quickly when I take my hands out. She slid back the lid of the box. Ribsy, who had opened one eye when he heard the murmurs of excitement from the children, caught a whiff of squirrel. He did not even stop to think. He automatically jumped to his feet, barking. Oh! Startled, Mrs. Yaxley gave a little scream and jumped away from the aquarium. She had not noticed Ribsy. Danny dropped the cardboard. A gray squirrel with a bushy tail darted out of the box and sprang up on the edge of the aquarium. Ribsy put his paws up on the counter and barked furiously. That squirrel did not belong in here. Ch-ch-ch-ch-ch, chattered Frisky, and ran along the counter below the windows with Ribsy following on the floor. The class laughed and shouted. Catch him! Cried Mrs. Yaxley. A boy grabbed Ribsy by the collar. Ribsy pawed the air with his front feet and strained at his collar until he choked. Mrs. Sonchek pounded on her desk with a ruler. Class, she cried. Class, please! How could any class be quiet with a squirrel loose in the room? Nothing that interesting had happened since Billy Amato had brought a live clam to school. Frisky jumped to the top of a pile of supplementary readers in the front of the room, and from there he took a flying leap to the staff that supported the flag in a bracket above the blackboard. Ribsy broke loose and ran under the flag. He put his paws in the chalk tray and made as much noise as he could. He would show that squirrel who belonged in this room. Frisky ran lightly up to the end of the staff that held the flag and scolded Ribsy. This infuriated Ribsy and delighted the class. If this kept up, there would be no time at all for math. People, cried Mrs. Sonchek, banging on the desk with a ruler. People, please! Then the door opened, and Mr. Woody, the principal, entered, followed by Mrs. Hildebrand, the school nurse. At the sight of the principal, the class became a little quieter. Not much, but a little. I'm terribly sorry, said Mrs. Yaxley, wringing her hands. I didn't mean to take up so much classroom time. Mr. Woody frowned at the class. Quiet, he ordered. What's going on in here? This time, the class obeyed. But Ribsy did not. Neither did Frisky, who flirted his tail and scolded. Mr. Woody grasped the situation. Someone hold the dog, said the principal. 3 boys ran to the front of the room. One tackled Ribsy, and the other 2 grabbed his collar. Mrs. Sonchek, get me a jacket, directed the principal. Here, take mine. Danny pulled off his jacket and handed it to Mr. Woody. Ribsy, straining at his collar, panted hoarsely. These boys were spoiling his fun. Quiet, everyone, repeated the principal. He walked to the front of the room and stepped up on one of the chairs in the reading circle. Now, Mrs. Sonchek, when I lift the flag down, you throw the jacket over the squirrel. Ribsy made strangling noises while the class, quiet at last, waited breathlessly to see if the principal's plan would work. This was much better than a live clam. Slowly the principal reached for the flagstaff, and slowly he lifted it from its bracket above the blackboard. The squirrel stopped chattering. Slowly, the principal lowered the staff. Never had Ribsy wanted to leap at that squirrel. Slowly, Mrs. Sonchek lifted Danny's jacket. Scolded Frisky. Ribsy, who would accept anything from people, even a bubble bath and a little straw hat and spectacles, resented the sassiness of that squirrel. He growled. Frisky leaped from the flagstaff. Mrs. Sonchek tried to throw the jacket over him, but it fell empty to the floor, while Frisky ran lightly along the chalk tray, hopped to the floor, and ran under the teacher's desk. Mrs. Sonchek picked up the jacket and prepared to try again, while Mrs. Yaxley and Mrs. Hildebrand took jackets from the cloakroom and prepared to stalk the angry squirrel. Mr. Woody replaced the flagstaff in its bracket and armed himself for the chase with the yardstick, while Mrs. Sonchek kept on the chalk tray to use as a pointer. When some of the boys started for the cloakroom to get their jackets too, Mr. Woody said sternly, "In your seats, class." There were enough people running around already. Mr. Woody rattled the ruler under Mrs. Sonchek's desk. Frisky darted out and ran down an aisle. The 3 women threw jackets and missed, while Ribsy barked and strained at his collar. The girls pulled their desks up from the floor. The boys sat on their desks to get a better view. Mr. Woody, said one of the boys who was holding Ribsy, why don't we let our mascot chase him? I bet he could catch him. No, said one half of the class, mostly girls who felt sorry for the squirrel. Yes, said the other half, mostly boys who wanted to see the dog catch a squirrel. Don't you dare sick that dog on my squirrel, said Danny to the boy who was holding Ribsy's collar. Class, cried Mrs. Sonchek. The squirrels skittered into one of the cloakroom doors. Naturally, the whole class had to turn around to face the back of the room. Ribsy could hardly stand it. If they would just let him go, he could show that squirrel a thing or two. Now we've got him, said Mr. Woody. Line up with the jackets at the door, and I'll go in with the yardstick and chase him out. The 3 women stood at one door of the cloakroom with the jackets aimed, while Mr. Woody marched in the other door with the yardstick. Thumping and whacking could be heard from the cloakroom. Look out! Here he comes! Yelled the principal. The teacher, the mother, and the school nurse crouched with the jackets. There was a flash of gray fur, and all 3 pounced. I've got him! Cried Mrs. Hildebrand, the school nurse, who was on her knees clutching a wiggling jacket. Quick! Roll him up, said Mrs. Yaxley. She took the rolled up squirrel and stuffed it, jacket and all, into the wooden box. Ribsy felt the boy's hold on his collar relax. He made a pathetic coughing sound. Hey, that's my jacket, said Billy Amato. I'll bring it back before lunch period, promised Mrs. Yaxley. My mother isn't going to like it if that squirrel chews up my jacket, said Billy. Mrs. Yaxley looked as if she had had a difficult morning. If he does, I'll buy you a new one, she said in desperation. Turning to the principal, she added apologetically, I'm terribly sorry to have taken up so much classroom time. But won't the squirrel smother? Asked Penny Moise. He's not rolled up that tight, answered Danny's mother, who was in a hurry to get the squirrel home to his cage. I never did get to tell you about my squirrel, complained Danny. Never mind, Danny. You showed him, and that is enough. His mother spoke sharply before she escaped from the classroom, with Frisky safe inside the box. it was all over. The class slid back into their seats and waited to see what Mr. Woody would say about the interesting time they had when they were supposed to be learning arithmetic. The principal came to the front of the room and gave Ribsy a stern look. Then he faced the class. Boys and girls, Mr. Woody sounded very serious, dogs are not allowed on school grounds. The class looked guilty. They all knew this, but it was Mr. Woody himself who had called the dog their mascot. And I'm afraid I made a mistake in making an exception. Mr. Woody looked once more at Ribsy. Now Ribsy looked guilty. He understood he had done something wrong, but he was not sure what it was. He thought dogs were supposed to chase squirrels and get rid of them. But this dog looked like such a friendly dog, continued Mr. Woody, and he seemed so well behaved that I overlooked the rule. Ribsy waved his tail wistfully to show that he didn't mean to do anything wrong, that he was really a very nice dog. Now we know, said Mr. Woody, that a dog does not make a good mascot, and that the rule is right. This should be a lesson for all of us. I'm afraid the dog will have to go. Aww. The class made a sad sound. They loved their mascot, did not want him to go. Neither did they want this morning, which had been such fun, turned into a lesson in obeying rules. When Mr. Woody looked at Ribsy, the dog stopped waving his tail and let it droop. He knew he had not succeeded in making everything all right again. He hung his head and looked dejected. Come on, boy, said Mr. Woody kindly, and took hold of Ribsy's collar. Come along with me. One of the girls in the front row began to cry. The whole class waved, and those in the last row of seats patted Ribsy as Mr. Woody led him out of the room. Mr. Woody did not let go of Ribsy's collar outside the classroom or even outside the building. He kept a tight grip until he had led Ribsy outside the metal fence that surrounded the schoolyard. Only then did he let go of Ribsy. He slammed the gate with a clang and said, "Goodbye, fella." Ribsy understood one thing. He was no longer wanted. This made him unhappy. And when Ribsy was unhappy, he seemed to droop all over. He took a few steps from the gate, stopped, and looked hopefully back. Maybe the man would change his mind and call him so that he could come running. The man had not changed his mind. "Go home," he said firmly and kindly. Go home. That was a command that Ribsy understood. He had heard it many times on Klickitat Street when he had run through neighbors' flower beds. He had heard it when Henry did not want him to chase after the car. Now the words reminded him of Henry and the familiar street with green lawns and trees. Go home, repeated the principal. After one more sad backward glance, Ribsy started walking. He wanted to go home. He wanted to obey the man. But he did not know where home was, and there was no way he could make the man understand. So Ribsy's done being a mascot, but he's still in the same spot. He doesn't know where home is, and this obviously was not Henry's school. So we'll have to see what Ribsy does. Now remember we read the story about the teacher who had all the pets in the classroom, and we said, yeah, I don't think so. We talked about how probably Mr. Duncan wouldn't think that was a good idea. Mr. Bruns definitely wouldn't think that was a good idea. And we talked about all the problems that could happen. Well, the story kind of showed us one of those problems. You have pets in there that don't really normally get along, like squirrels and dogs. It can cause a big problem. So now Ribsy's back on his own. He's going to be wandering around again. But the next chapter is called Ribsy Goes to a Football Game. We'll see what happens there next time, all right? Catch you later.